Well, he is Brad Gross, Senior Crewing and Operations Manager at Flo Sports, and we're going to tell his story on the On to Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley, also a broadcaster in Olympic sports. Learn more about his rise in the business, but also learn about him as a family man, as somebody who has grown up with a dream in sports and being able to achieve that and take it to new heights. I'm Bryan Fenley with, of course, Fox Sports Radio, as I mentioned. And first of all, Brad, I really appreciate you doing this, man. This has been a fun series, and thanks for being a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Excited, Bryan. I'm glad you reached out. Excited to share my journey and always trying to inspire some of the folks nowadays that want to jump into broadcasting and jump into, especially on the sports side. So any sort of conversation around this is exciting to me.
Well, let's start the conversation here. And that when you think about your career, and obviously a lot has been attributed to your hard work and being highly motivated and your talents. But aside from that, Brad, when you think about the whole notion of people believing in you,
Yep.
how powerful has that been, that aspect towards where your career has gone?
So that's an interesting standpoint because I don't always view it as people believing in me, but you in a way, especially in my role now, you kind of, even when you're a producer, you almost have to be a salesman, and you have to sell your vision to them and get people involved. So when I was producing shows for many years, I would often see if you had everybody who bought into your product or what your vision was, it would shine through. You'd have crew members that would come in extra hours early just to chat with you and go all the way through. And then if you had individuals that didn't buy in, you would see that struggle. So whether it's camera operators or whether it's a replay operator, you'd see people that don't want to go the extra standpoint. So it's interesting. It's not so much I always think about people believing in me, but I guess in a way I'm often trying to sell a little bit of a vision. I'm a big component of I want to encourage people. I always like encouraging individuals who may go, is this worth it? Should I continue to go about it? Broadcasting in general, like it's not always the highest paying job right away. A lot of people do work for free or they do it for low hourly wages, and you sometimes have to grind your teeth a little bit to get there. And it's nice to feel that you have somebody who's got your back or are willing to kind of push you through it and everything. And this is I never felt that I always had like a mentor per se. And often people always talk about, hey, I had a mentor or anything like that. And I often was like, hey, I never had one. But maybe if you don't have one, you are one to other people. So I almost enjoy, if I didn't have a mentor per se, I am that to those who I talk with and trying to encourage that. So it's always good to be a mentor to others. And that's what I put a lot of pride in also.
You take a lot of pride in giving back. Brad
Yep.
Gross is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. And even though you didn't have a mentor per se growing up in the business, how were you able to encourage yourself during those early times when you used the word grind, and it is getting your career off the ground? What were you telling yourself to continue to encourage yourself during those early moments?
Yeah, so I actually am one of the luckier ones in the industry. When I went to Virginia Tech, and I initially didn't know that sports broadcasting or working in sports and blending in broadcasting was a thing. Um, to go a little bit further back, how I even got into the video side of things, I was a little mini entrepreneur as a kid and used to sell things on eBay at 11, 12 years old, and flipped some things and ended up getting a new camera that had a video mode and shot some things and ended up going, well, what's this video? Taught myself to edit. We had a broadcasting kind of high school broadcasting, and I used to be the one who put together little intros, little SNL like skits, things like that, and was really kind of picked up the editing content side. And it kind of changed a little my pathway. I ended up going to Virginia Tech for journalism, and that wasn't my initial path. I was planning to be an architect and go down that road, but I have come from great parents, and my mom really encouraged me to do what I wanted to do. Don't always chase the money or anything like that. So I went to Virginia Tech and enjoyed my first semester freshman year, but kind of didn't know if it was the right fit or what I was kind of doing there. I chose Virginia Tech because if you ever see Lane Stadium, it's a marvel, and you just are like, wow, this is larger than life. And then my second semester, freshman year, somebody came into our class, and I actually got lucky. Our professor said, "Hey, you should come into this my 8 a.m. also instead of my 9:30 because I have a student in here that I think could be a good fit." And basically, Virginia Tech Athletics would hire one or two freshmen every year to be put on a full ride scholarship, same scholarship as the quarterback for Virginia Tech got. I got gears. I have bowl rings over here with my name on it, all that sort of jazz. And ended up running down there. I ran down to the athletics center right after they pitched the thing. And it was interesting at the time. A lot of the students in my class were like, oh, even if they give you a full scholarship, why would I want to like give up my being a college student or being a like going to the football games and tailgating and have all that sort of aspect. I personally thought it was amazing to even be able to be around sports, broadcasting. I didn't know it was a thing. Went down there, applied, somehow got the job, and then from there it took off. And I mentioned earlier when we were just kind of on a pre-call, like me shooting coaches video, and a lot of it was from the football team. It starts out you're at every practice, you're at every game, you're shooting coaches video, you're doing the video board broadcasts for men's and women's basketball, all the Olympic sports. And at that time, there wasn't the ESPN, ACC network money or anything. It was a lot of Hokies Extra was our like web streaming platform, but you learned a lot from those who have grinded in the business, those who worked in local news and were getting paid $18,000, $20,000, and just were passionate. So I had a lot of folks that really taught us like the ins and outs of everything, not only on content side, shooting, production and anything on that aspect, but also on the live side. So we did all the video board broadcasts, we did all the web streaming. So you'd play the role as a director, a TD, a replay operator, audio, camera operator, all that sort of thing. So one of actually my first events, my boss kind of tossed me right in. Like I taught swim lessons for a while, and just tossed me right into the pool. And I arrived, and we were playing Duke at home. And he said, "Hey, you're going to be the director tonight." And I was like, "Oh, it's Duke. It's Duke." I'm like 18 years old, and I was a huge basketball fan growing up. Like, I don't know if you could do it. He's like, "I think you could do it." So did the video board broadcast for the Duke game. Was super excited just being a part of it. And it was one of those moments that it gives you confidence every time that you end up being in a leadership role in broadcasting. I think there's so many. Everybody always looks at the producer or the director, but everybody can be in a leadership role. Even if you're the replay operator or camera operator, you can always showcase to others that you're in a leadership role. And that to me gave me the confidence to realize I think I can do this. And I always use this in a little bit of a phrase, and it's the truth. A lot of people say in broadcasting, especially on the live production side, is because they're always chasing that perfect show. So it's like an addiction. So you always come back and you always look back like, oh, this could have been there, or this could have been that. And that's why people saying it the whole time, because we're always looking for that perfect show, that perfect broadcast. And it's never possible. But that's what keeps us coming back. And that was a little bit of a taste of, I looked at all my mistakes. I rewatched the broadcast, like looked at the film, and was like almost like a coach. Like, how do I get better?
Wow.
What were the things? So, and a lot of that is attributed because I work so closely with the football staff. Technically, we were on the football staff, and like that was during Frank Beamer days. And if you talk about a mentor, he wasn't a broadcasting mentor, but I got a news clipping right up here of Frank Beamer, and Frank Beamer is probably the top individual I'll ever meet in my lifetime. How he handled his business and all the pressure, and also how he delegated to his coaches. And it wasn't about winning or losing. It was just about being a better person day by day. And that sort of thing is not only stuck with me, but stuck with a lot of the folks also. So that was a long-winded answer to your question. I don't even remember what it was, but that's how it is. I told you I talk a little bit too much sometimes.
You don't talk too much because it is true that this is an open forum and you are an open book. And this is a place where I want you to be comfortable and to
Yeah.
feel and to get out what you want to get out. And so it's interesting. You talked about how there are people in the business that have empowered you, but then Coach Beamer, who sure is connected to sports, but not necessarily broadcasting per se, that he made you a better person.
Yep.
What is your constant daily striving to be a better person look like?
I mean, it's just, I wouldn't say I grade myself every day, but I'm constantly like, think things I could have got up a little bit earlier. I missed the gym on this day, or if I'm playing golf, like I've played golf all my life, I'm like, I should have done this, I should have done that, or anything. So I dissect myself so much with so many aspects. And I hate to go back. I really think it was just working around. I played sports in my life, but when you're with those top athletes and top coaches, you really take a different perspective of like how your actions can actually affect others and you have a final result. So say football per se, like how an assistant coach or said something to a certain player and then he made a bad play on the field and then you lose by a touchdown. That is really what occurs. So I think a little bit on my mindset is I used to be a little bit like chasing perfection. I always used to say, try to be perfect today, try to be perfect today, especially when I was at Virginia Tech for a while and doing certain things that you had to be perfect aspect. And then I've just taken a little bit of a step back and tried to enjoy the ride a little bit more at this point, than just always trying to hold myself at a high pedestal work wise. As a person, I think it's always important to continue to know you can push yourself and push yourself. I love the stories. I mean, I'm not a spring chicken anymore, but I love the stories of seeing an individual who is in their 40s or 50s and saying, I feel I'm in the best shape of my life or the clearest I've ever felt or anything. So it always gives motivation that like you're not over the hill and you're just continuing to climb and push and that sort of aspect too. So yeah, it's interesting. I don't necessarily have a way that I push myself every day. I just know that maybe a little bit from golfing, like too, like you can always get that extra birdie next time or something. So yeah.
I love that mindset. Brad Gross is with me, senior crewing and operations manager at Flo Sports. I'm Bryan Fenley, broadcaster with Olympic Sports and with Fox Sports Radio. So you brought up this interesting point, Brad, in that you now are at the stage of your career where you can be gung-ho, you can be all about working hard and getting the best out of whatever you're doing. But at the same time, you brought up this interesting part of enjoying the ride a little bit more.
Yeah.
Where do you think that came into play here? Because that's a hard thing for a lot of people to do, is to give it all they have in the field, but then step back and appreciate what they've done. That's not something everybody can do in this business.
Yeah, I think it was just you look back and you kind of go, it's like that aspect of your career is done or behind you, and you almost have the rear view mirror look. And I think a lot of people just continue to look forward and look forward and look forward. And I had a lot of moments of because I did Virginia Tech and then I worked for like a small startup for a year and I came back for my GA at Virginia Tech and worked there in the athletic department and was a little bit older at that time. And I kind of was able to enjoy it the second time around in a way. And you don't always get that in life. So when things are gone, you think, oh, maybe I'll go back. You never do. Like you never go back to, like my mom always told me, you kind of never want to go back. It's never as good the second or third time. You just want to enjoy it where it was. But I look back and I enjoyed my time greatly at Virginia Tech and what I was taught there in the athletics department. And I was a student at the same time, but like I can't remember many things in the classroom, but I remember many days in that athletic office and many nights and weekends and holidays. And in the same way as that now in the organization I'm in Flo Sports is I spent 5 years on the road as a producer and all of that. And that's in the rear view mirror for me. And sometimes I want to go back and get on the road and be a part of that sort of aspect. But in reality, I kind of go, hey, that was a part of my career. That was a part of my development. And I look back in a positive aspect of what I learned from that. And it allows me in my current role to kind of like make an impact that is beyond just a single broadcast. So part of that moving into my current role was how do I make an impact that is not just a single broadcast, but many broadcasts that can help broadcasting. I'm obviously I work for Flo and huge fan of Flo Sports, and But I'm always a bigger fan of broadcasting in general. So I want to just make broadcasting bigger, um, give the consumers what they want, and have a piece of making that and elevating those products for those individuals too.
So what is it, Brad, the individual broadcast that makes you feel most alive when you're in the middle of one?
So I would say, and you're going to get a true like understanding of me as a person. So I grew up watching wrestling, like WWE, Vince McMahon wrestling, in its heyday, like the Attitude Era, 1997, 98, where like it was no longer Hulk Hogan just rips open his shirt and the fans go wild. They try to do sports entertainment, is what they call it nowadays. So I've always had a little bit of that WrestleMania vision. Are things taking it to the next level, storylines or any sort of that aspect when I was in production and producing shows. When you're doing big college sports or the Big Five or anything, it's easier because you have so many people writing storylines or blog postings or anything about it. But when you're doing more niche sports that I often did, or smaller events for partners, a lot of the storylines are driven from our own staff inside, or they don't even exist. Like you have to create them as they're kind of going about the actual competition that's going on in the storyline. So some of my favorite aspects would just be having a vision and executing upon it. Meaning, say we do a series that is a partnership with USA Wrestling and Final X. And when that first came around, that first year, I was tabbed to be the lead producer for it. And it was a huge team effort, a lot of stress, a lot of ups and downs. But one of my things was I wanted to incorporate more of a on the mat 360 shot, like a little bit of like what you may see maybe in a UFC if they were together, or bring something out there that wrestling hasn't seen, like try to elevate the sport. And this was all in my head. I didn't have anything to go off of. Wrestling hasn't done this, even UFC hasn't done it, but I had something in my head. And then when we ended up executing it on site, those are the little moments that I really enjoy. Like, all right, now the vision's coming together, and now we can push this storyline or that storyline about it. So it's a little bit on the creative with me, like seeing the vision from a visual standpoint. Not necessarily just like always like hitting this graphic at the right spot, or this talent says this thing at the right spot. But there's always a nice part is if you almost feel like a fortune teller, and you go, hey, at third quarter, this could happen because of this, this, and that, and it does, then you look like the smartest individual on the truck or the rim at the point. So those are exciting. But a lot of me has always become from like the spectacle. I like bringing things like try to do it larger than life, even if you have a small budget, and kind of go from there. So that's a little bit of the mindset.
So that idea of sort of hitting a storyline at the appropriate time during a broadcast, would you, and going back to what you said about golf, this would be sort of like the double eagle that you hit on the 500 yard par five,
Yep.
or the birdie that you throw down on your scorecard, as to how that must feel for you. Brad Gross is with me, senior crewing and operations manager at Flo Sports. I'm Bryan Fenley with Fox Sports Radio. How hard are you on yourself? You talked a little bit about this when after a broadcast, you being a perfectionist.
Yep.
How far back do you see moments of you being a perfectionist, even before you got in a broadcast, when you were
Yep.
growing up and you saw that those traits were inherent within you?
A lot of that came from my parents, and it's like my mom's Australian. She, and maybe it's in all Australians or whatever. I love Australia, and she was an individual who was brought up with a regimen. Like they had a pool in her backyard in Sydney, and she told me that every morning her dad would have her and her sister doing laps all day. So
Wow.
I grew up in a highly sports family. So uh swimming, it was swimming would go into soccer, would go into baseball, would go into basketball, just constant like seasonal sort of thing. So a lot of that sort of perfection probably comes from the sports side of it, and just like having quality coaches and having individuals around you that really expect the best, or hold you at a high standard. But um, it's been interesting because I look back at that and I feel my mom kind of expected a lot out of us, but not necessarily from like, you got to be the best, but it made us like, hey, go for the A's in school or try to get into the top college or all that sort of. And it was always built into us. But as I've kind of got older, and not to make this the parenting podcast, but I've seen her release from
Ah,
that. And instead of it like expecting high perfection from you all the time, it's kind of encouraging you wherever you want to go. So even if there is a moment of being down or unsure of what you want to do, is this the right fit for me right now? There's support. So it's like there's this great Nike commercial that has Earl Woods saying something as Tiger, and this was probably back in 2005. And like, I think the phrase goes like, you don't teach an individual to have a mindset like it's kind of like brought into him. So he would talk about how he dropped his bag of clubs
yeah.
as Tiger was about to swing and all these sort of things. And you realize like that's what made somebody like Tiger Woods that strong mindset. And if you've ever had the chance to be Tiger chasing at a PGA championship or go on, it's amazing that that is an individual and that sort of mindset and that structure. So I think in a way, not to say my mom was Earl Woods by any means, but she definitely taught me some ways that have stuck with me my entire life. So being that perfectionist came at an early standpoint, and I think it's allowed me to continue that as an adult, but also understand like perfection isn't in getting a 10 out of 10. It's about like probably understanding each step of the way and the decision making around it and evaluating as you go.
It's interesting to hear how her perspective has changed a little bit. Not that she
Yep.
never had empathy, but it
Yep.
seems like she's added a little bit more to the equation here. And what she was all about, in sort of me paraphrasing what you were saying and summarizing, is that she was always on the go,
Yep.
nonstop, always
Nonstop.
gung ho. Why do you think, or how much do you attribute your ability now that you're not working on just one broadcast,
Yep.
but you're overseeing? So you have to kind of have your tentacles in all kinds of different places, and it's a nonstop, very adrenaline driving
Yep.
role that you play in. But what can you take from your childhood and your mom saying, do this, do that, do this, do that, to now you being in a situation now of comfort where you are able to take on these projects with a lot of moving parts
Yep.
nowadays?
Yeah, so it's pretty simple, and I get away from it. But we actually have conversations on the phone when I am all over the place, and she says, "Get back to your list." So like, I have list over list all over the place in here, and I some lists are smaller than others, or on different sort of paths that kind of separate it. So I know nowadays you have project management tools and everything like from the computer side of things, but I'm old school on the list. So what I do is I'll have all this scratch paper as I'm going. And then as the day goes along, I'll remove that and start a new one for tomorrow. So I've really been working very hard to try to do a hard out mentally and not be the person who's still looking at emails 24/7. It's so easy to do. And it's addicting probably in the same way as a 16-year-old loves to do the new TikTok dance, but it's addicting
Yeah.
to look at that email. But once you look at something, your mind gets into there, and you're no longer in reality of what your household is or what's going on. So, and my job, truthfully, is a lot of times being a firefighter, like
Yeah.
just fires everywhere. So I rarely ever get an email that is a positive, everything's going great, just want to remind you. It's usually, this is an issue here. How are we going to get it? Or what
Yeah.
you did the work here, we got to change it to that, which excites you. But at the same time, you do have to realize like, create the list, have realistic standards for yourself, understand that like you may not be able to get through everything. There's no super joy, in my opinion, about working 14, 15, 16-hour days back to back to back. You may feel like, hey, I'm pretty far ahead, but I mean, you can't win this game in life when it comes to career. There are plenty of people that work their entire career trying to get across that finish line, but it will move. It will constantly move. And then once you're there, they'll start the race over. So it's good to have a perspective that it's a little bit of a journey instead of just being like a constant race, which also my wife reminds me of quite a bit also with that is tries to realize it's not so much a race, it's a journey, take some time away from it and all of that aspect too. So
When do you find that she communicates that to you the most?
probably when I'm talking like a crazy man to myself, walking around like all the time. So I tend to talk to myself like and have conversations or whatever. And when that's kind of going on, it's a little bit of like let's reel it in and anything like that. So I was one of those individuals that was on the COVID side. So like my job is fully remote. I'm on the East Coast. Like Flo Sports has its headquarters in Austin, and I lived in Austin for a while. Great city, but we're kind of a little bit all over. So I don't necessarily get to have those conversations, those office pass bys or anything. So I almost have these in my head or out loud, like, oh, this is what this person's thinking or whatever. And when that happens, it's like he's basically trying to create like a corporate world office environment in our own home right now, which she's like, we don't need that right now. So let's reel it back a little bit.
Well, there's the balancing act that she plays. Brad Gross is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. And as we sort of, Brad, wrap up this conversation, I love the fact that what you can do is have somebody, and I think that's another really interesting a part to this, is to have somebody, whether it's a loved one, a good friend, who can sort of like turn your, like, because there's a vision of constantly being driven and achieving and accomplishing, which will never go away.
Yep.
But the role, my final question here is the overall role of having someone like your wife by your side through this
Mm-hmm.
as that support, who is able to kind of have that awareness of kind of bring you back to earth a little bit. But when you think about the overall role that she has played on your life and your career, where would you
Mm-hmm.
say that would fall?
So I met my wife my junior year of college. Um, and so she met me when I was very ramped up at Virginia Tech athletics. Like I was still trying to be a normal college student, was in a fraternity, was going to class, but also had this job that was like a full time. So like in on Saturday morning when people are picking up the solo cups, I had my khakis on and I was heading the athletic department to work. So she was always around me, kind of working on weekends or being a part of this, and probably was realized I was passionate about it. That led to a long distance kind of relationship when I lived in Austin and I was on the road all the time, and that passion kind of just continued for me, and there was a lot of support. So you don't know what you have in a partner unless you've been in multiple relationships in that sort of standpoint. But with Caitlin, I've always had somebody that has done something that I think a lot of people wouldn't do. So I don't know if how I would do if somebody else was gone for multiple years and only coming back holidays or anything like that. And that's a support level that I don't think can be recreated for myself. And I've had the same thing with family where I would have to leave on Christmas morning and go get a plane and go somewhere. And there's always been support on that aspect. And I'm not always the best with the phone. Like I'm not, when I'm in production mode or when I was like, they wouldn't hear from me, like besides like at the end of the day, everything's all right or all of that. So, and I think even to take it the next step is like, I have more of a, I'm home a lot more, not on the road. And I have times where I go to certain events and I see the road crew or I see wherever, and I say, hey, like, I'd love to kind of go back to that. And I have a wife that would say, hey, if you really want to go back to that, I'd support you kind of going back to that sort of mindset. So, in a way, I think a lot of people work on the road for a long, long time and then they finally get off. And then it's like you're not allowed to go back on. And I kind of had my road experience pretty early in my career and now I'm off. So I've been able to kind of balance both of them. But to have somebody that will support you, that will allow you, if you want to go chase your dreams again, is very rare, I think, when it comes to it, especially in our world nowadays where we can flip flop and want a new job next day or this and that. I want to be an astronaut today and a firefighter tomorrow and like race car driver the next day. It's nice to have that support family and with my wife and stuff, knowing that that can happen.
It's priceless to have that support. And it's
Yep.
not easy, as you pointed out, when you're on the road a lot, this business, the long hours, and it can put strains on families. But you're an example that families can make it work. And it
Yep.
goes back to something that's so important, is that in your instance, she is so behind you, and there's nothing that you could put into words to explain how important that is for you,
Yep.
in that she's a cultivator of your passions and sees that. And as we sort of finish up this conversation, that's another really interesting aspect of what has led to what you've done, is having that teammate by your side, and how much she has played a role in your life, and that needs to
Yep.
be mentioned. And we certainly accomplished that. Brad Gross with Flo Sports, Senior Crewing and Operations Manager. How fun was this? Thanks for taking us on a journey through your life and your outlook and your upbringing and your family life. This was sort of like we're hitting on everything here, and
Oh
I love
man,
your
we
openness.
could have continued. Now I want to get to you. Like, can we bring it on like full circle? Go down there, sort of thing. So yeah, I really enjoyed it, Brian. I appreciate the time, and thanks again.